Hey everybody, and welcome back to Inside Gaming, and it is here, it is real, we have it, Final Fantasy VII Remake, it exists. It's no longer this tech demo from the PS3 era, so we have our hands-on copies, and we took into the world of Midgar to review this game. With me is Amir.
Hi, how's it going, guys?
And Evan.
That's Soldier First Class, Evan, to you, actually.
Soldier, yeah, for sure, Soldier First Class, I'll believe that.
Let me just drop say that I'm with Soldier ex-Soldier, as many times as possible during this review.
So before we get into this, for full disclosure, Square Enix did provide us with 3 free codes for the game, so thank you, Square Enix, for letting us do this. So, first and foremost, what are your guys' history with Final Fantasy VII, or Final Fantasy in general, or Square Enix in general? Got any favorite games?
Oh man, I think for Final Fantasy VII, that's pretty easy. I think I played it around when I was in the 7th grade, and played it twice through, and then at some point ended up getting a hold of a strategy guide, and then played it again like a 3rd time through. So this is a game for me that like hit me during that era. I guess I am that guy in terms of this was like my quintessential Final Fantasy game. I had played others and seen them around, but this is the one that really kind of got me in, I think.
Really, most of my Final Fantasy knowledge comes from Kingdom Hearts. I mean, I've played a few of the Final Fantasy games. I played 8, I played 10, and I played 15. So I definitely jumped around. I never played 7. So this is definitely my first experience with 7. But yeah, I mean, I'm not super nostalgically tied to these characters outside of Kingdom Hearts, of course.
And I'm glad we have this very wide range of opinions on this, because this is a very important game for a lot of people, but some people just did not play this game, so having that separate opinion in there, this is going to be fun. I think this is going to be great. For me, Final Fantasy VI was always my favorite Final Fantasy, and I really liked Tactics Advance, but I loved Final Fantasy VII. My nostalgia goggles are there, but you know what? Let's talk about this game first, and more importantly, how much time did you guys put into the game? Did you beat it? How far did you get?
So I put in around the 20-ish hour mark. I think I knew that you were working on this review, Caden, so I knew that you would finish the game. So I was, able to take the luxury of kind of taking my time through each section and trying to do all the side quests and everything. And I was definitely playing it on dad hours in the wee hours of the night. But jammed, through. Probably got about halfway, I think.
I'd say I'm about 5 or 6 hours in. To be honest, I haven't been counting, and I also, obviously I haven't beat it because Final Fantasy games are pretty meaty, and also there were a few times where I got stuck and I wasn't really sure what to do, like the pleb I am. But I mean, aside from that, I was also taking my time and trying to figure things out, like going through the different menus and trying to figure out the different leveling up systems and just really trying to get a grasp on it, because my issue with a lot of JRPGs is the very complex leveling up system and all that stuff. So I really wanted to try to grasp that first, because I know that typically if I have a better understanding of that, then I'll have a better time playing the game.
I finished it. I made a mad dash to the end of the game. So I missed out on a lot of side quests and a lot of extra flavor, because there is a lot of that there. And this game is pretty meaty. It will, I feel like it could easily hit that 50-hour mark or more if you're doing all the side quests and doing absolutely everything, hunting for every little piece of materia and every hidden item across the entire game. It can be pretty long. It was about 30-something hours for me. Though some of those hours were just me sitting there listening to the soundtrack, so maybe it got inflated a little bit, but depending on how far you want to go into this game, it's pretty long, and that's actually very good for what essentially is part 1 of a very long game that we're about to get into. This is a very important reminder. We're just in Midgar, folks. We're not going to be going too far into detail about everything that goes into this story along the way, because there is some big differences, and we're also not going to be showing any end game content. We're going to cut it off right about the halfway point for what we show on screen. So don't worry, we're going to try and keep all those spoilers to an absolute minimum. So with that all said, let's get into this story. Hit these bullet points real quick. You play as Cloud Strife, an ex-soldier, now working as a mercenary with a rebel group called Avalanche. Through the story, you'll be tasked with taking down Shinra and the Mako reactors in an effort to help save the planet. For those who play the original Final Fantasy VII, the story beats, the main ones are still there. And you'll finish up with the cast leaving Midgar. That's one of the big points of this game is this is the Midgar section. This is all it is. And that's, again, about as much as we'll say. Everything else would be very, very, very spoilery. So just keep in mind that this isn't the Final Fantasy VII game you grew up with. Not the one I grew up with, for sure.
It's striking how different it is, yeah.
It wears that with pride, and I'm really kind of glad with that. It does keep a lot of those like big, heartstrings, those big tugging moments there, but there's a lot new here for fans to digest. And for people who have not really ever played Final Fantasy VII, they get this really in-depth look into these characters that we didn't get for the original.
Yeah, can we talk about the characters for a second?
Let's do it.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting to see new characters in this game at all. Like, I guess it could have happened, but, when they say remake, you assume that they're going to kind of stay loyal to the original. But yeah, there's a new soldier character, which is completely new, right? I think the only soldiers in Final Fantasy VII are Cloud and Sephiroth for the most part. You kind of get mentions.
They talk a little bit about someone else, but,
Yeah, but you don't like fight anyone. I mean, we want to be careful about spoilers, but can we talk about Roche a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, he was actually my favorite part of this game so far. I don't know, his boss battle was actually pretty awesome. I liked his introduction. The only thing is it gets a little annoying when you're fighting like at that second part and he keeps repeating the same line over and over again. I thought he was cool.
I think that's the first point where I was like, oh wait, this isn't my Final Fantasy VII, like had that kind of weird guttural reaction, but he is cool. I think I was like just a little bit off put at first, and then like once he was kind of around more, I got into it. But like narratively, I think there's some weird stuff going on there where he has like unexplained motives, and I hope that they make good on that stuff. I don't want to get too much into it, I guess, but there's just some actions that he does that you're just like, wait, why would he do this? It doesn't make any sense. So hopefully they do get to that.
Roche is really, really fun. Just a very boisterous and loud character, which really kind of offsets Cloud quite a bit. And I like that dynamic so much. You see Cloud as this ex-soldier, and you see how he acts. So you're just like, okay, so soldiers act like this. And then you see this guy, and it's a completely different story. So it's like,
yeah,
your take on what a soldier is completely different. Though I will say, for keen-eyed players, please pay attention to Roche's sword. Very important.
Yes. I think there's some other probably notable characters, and we probably don't want to spend too much time on everyone, but I think like Jesse's being talked a lot about.
Jesse is probably my favorite character in this game. And I say that in utmost confidence. I'm so glad when the original trailers dropped, I'm just like, everybody's talking about Tifa, everybody's talking about Aeris. I'm going to tell you right now, everybody's going to fall in love with Jesse, and I'm so glad I was right.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. And it speaks to the larger story changes in general, where things are kind of a little bit more drawn out, and you get actual time to kind of interact with the Avalanche crew and get to learn about them and stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, as someone who isn't entirely familiar with the original Final Fantasy VII, I do enjoy the characters. I'd say my personal favorite between the main Avalanche crew would definitely be Biggs and Wedge. I think their relationship is just so cool, and just the fact that they got a freaking Badger from Breaking Bad to play Wedge,
yeah,
that's pretty awesome. I don't know, that's pretty cool.
I think the only other character I want to shout out is Chadley. Do you guys find Chadley?
Yes.
I mean, did you see Chadley yet? Okay.
Yeah,
it's just so wild.
He's the kid that tells you to equip the assess materia, right?
And he says your name a lot.
Yes.
He's always like, Cloud, I've got this new materia for you. Cloud.
Yeah.
Thank you for your help, Cloud.
We talked about this a little bit in our Resident Evil 3 review, and a lot of people said this in the comments, so I'd like to address this. While this game does call itself a remake, it is absolutely not. This is not a remake. Resident Evil 3 was closer to a remake than this was. This is absolutely a reimagining and a second try at this entire story. This is more like an alternate universe telling of things because of how different it actually is. So, again, lots different here.
Well, I was going to ask how faithful is it to the original? Because like I said earlier, I'm not super familiar with the original. So when you say it's more of a reimagining, is it kind of like Resident Evil, like the Resident Evil remakes, where they kind of have the same story beats but just change everything else and like the order things happen in, or how does it stack up to the original, basically?
I feel like it's faithful enough to make you feel like, oh, this is how I remember it, but also, it gives you those additional answers that you may not have gotten in the original game without going too much into detail. Specifically, there's a lot of additional stuff with Cloud and Tifa and delving into their relationship. There's a lot more interaction with the core Avalanche group with Cloud and explaining why it's so important for Cloud to continue to do this, and wearing Cloud down from that, like, oh, I'm an ex-soldier and I'm just a merc right now and I'm just going to be helping you because it's money. And then, him slowly coming out of his shell and breaking through that. And, oh boy, Aerith and Cloud really, they dive into that pretty hard, and I'm glad for it.
I think the awkwardness between Cloud and Aerith is really great. It like you said, Caden, is really about like breaking down that shell and that barrier. And I think at first glance, there's a lot of things in this game that seem shallow and surface level, but if you've played before, you kind of know what the bigger story is building up to. And that's where this game is really, really interesting. Like you said, it's a reimagining. They know that a lot of the audience has played this game before, and the things that they're tipping their hand to and the things that they're changing, like if you've played Final Fantasy VII before, you're like, wait, that seems really different. Even though, like you said, all the main beats are kind of there. Like you move narratively through the same kind of structure and locations, albeit at a different pace. But there's just a lot of interesting things that they're foretelling and foreshadowing, like big major story events that you get glimpses of and flashes of in Cloud's episodes and things. I was really surprised by it. I was like, wait, are they showing this now? And it was really taken aback.
So we've talked about the story, and I feel like that's probably the biggest section of this entire thing that everybody kind of wants to know about. Is the story good? Is it gripping? Is it, is it the same? Will it feel like Final Fantasy VII? I feel like it absolutely feels like Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of the characters here, they definitely have weight to them. And, again, being the guy, the black sheep here, I feel like the characters do have a lot of weight to them, and just, kind of coming into it. I know what a Final Fantasy game is in terms of just how it kind of moves you, you know what I mean? And I feel like that does happen here. But really the only thing that's a little bit jarring for me is just sometimes it sells it, sometimes it doesn't, just with the way the characters are actually animated. But yeah, I'll touch on that later.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about, now that we've got this big story section out of the way, let's talk about what you'll actually be doing in the game, playing it. I feel like, Square had taken everything that they learned from Final Fantasy 15 and Kingdom Hearts 3 and really just pushed that up a lot more. Gone is the classic turn-based style of gameplay, and now we have a much more action-packed battle system. Again, though, it's very much akin to Final Fantasy 15, Kingdom Hearts 3, so if you played either of those, you do know a bit of what you're getting into here. The ATB gauge returns in a new form, and it works. It works well. Though the characters you're not playing as, their gauge reloads time is super slow, and it's really snail-paced, but the fact that you can swap between them so quickly and then build up that ATB gauge for Cloud and then switch to Barret and then Tifa and so on and so forth, it'll allow you to have a constant string of overpowering attacks that, will stagger most of the enemies, at least the smaller ones. And sometimes you can get lucky and stagger a big one right out of the gate, and it's really awesome. So once you learn those those little tiny notes about how this battle system works, you can really start gaming the system. But the AI is just, it's not great. It's not okay. It's not, Donald and Goofy churning out potions like it's going out of style, but the AI just kind of sits there and kind of just does its thing. And if you want them to do anything actually meaningful, it's just like, all right, Tifa, I see you punching there, but your ATB gauge is full. Please use it, use an item, use a spell, use something. It's just like, no, you have to do that for me. It's like, okay, I get it. I understand, it's fine, but I wish the AI was better.
I kind of prefer that level of control, honestly, because some of those fights get really dicey, and if somebody uses the wrong ability, it could cause you to wipe. And I think that's a good point that you touch on, is that you really, there's two different modes of combat in this game, and it's combat where you need to pay attention, or encounters where you can kind of just mash your way through. And anything where you need to pay attention, you do need to be switching, because you'll get wiped if you don't constantly have those ATB gauges filled. So yeah, I think it might even be kind of a hard learning curve, because they don't really tell you you can switch characters, but there's not really a good fight that kind of helps you learn kind of how to play the game, I guess, or how to do that combat. And I think that we've seen that in some other reviews and some other places, people talking about the kind of weird difficulty spikes in the game. And I think it's just because some fights just require different things of you. And this also isn't the type of game where you can not manage your equipment, right? You have to be in there changing your material loadouts and upgrading your weapons and things like that. It really helps a lot.
Yeah, and you definitely feel the strength upgrades from that too. Like you feel stronger in battle, which I like.
I do agree that, it's like if you go into a battle, especially a boss battle, unprepared, then, if you have the wrong materia equipped, you're probably going to wipe. If you go into a boss battle and they just so happen to be strong against ice magic and everybody has, Blizzara or Blizzaga attached, and you're just like, well, I've been leveling these up because they were good against these other enemies, but now I have to switch to, fire spells, I haven't leveled those up as much, then you're kind of in trouble, and it's like, okay, what do I do?
Yeah, for sure. You can really just get put in a spot. And I think also, if you, again, it's like they know that a large majority of the audience has played this game. When you see like HP up and MP up materials, you're like, oh, okay, I need to grind on these early so that they're really useful later on. It's so refreshing to see all of that stuff kind of come back in the remake. The materia system is so much fun. Like, I loved it in the original. I think they're doing a really good job here. I don't know if everything links kind of the same, because I was trying like some combos that I think I used to use, but they didn't work, but my memory's a little bit fuzzy. But it's still cool that it's all in there. And yeah, like, combat can get hard. I think one thing to note about the other thing is like the block button. It's really punishing when you try to use it in the early game, but it's like so clutch for some boss fights and stuff. You have to use a block button or you're just going to get wrecked time and time again.
As far as the gameplay goes, I mean, again, Black Sheep here. Hey, how you doing? I think it's easily the best gameplay in any Final Fantasy game I've ever played. I mean, I think it serves better to a modern audience with the new, real-time gameplay. It's a little bit more akin to like Final Fantasy 15 or Kingdom Hearts. And honestly, this is exactly how I want Final Fantasy to play. It's definitely good for that balance between real-time, and then there is some tactical stuff thrown in there as well. But I definitely feel you about like, needing to guard. I really like dodging. I like doing, the evade and then kind of bouncing back and then leaping forward into an attack. It all just feels very fluid.
There is one thing I would like to touch on. The weapon upgrade system, it's a lot like the sphere grid from Final Fantasy X, and I really loved the sphere grid, so this is a really welcome change for me. It kept me checking on what upgrades would be best suited for the character builds, and if you don't like them, you go to Chudley, and you can reset all of those upgrades. So Chadley's actually pretty important in this game for being a new character. You're going to be going to Chadley pretty often for a lot of different reasons. So let's move on to, what everybody's going to be seeing, the presentation, the graphics. What did you think?
This is just hands down a really beautiful game to look at. Given the source material, all that 90s science fiction holds up really well. It's still a really unique world to me. I haven't dove into a lot of the other Final Fantasies after 10, but this stuff still feels really unique to me in a lot of ways. And obviously there's some through lines like Mogs and like chocobos and stuff, that are in every Final Fantasy game. But I think like the idea of Midgar, the city that sits on top of, like literally sits on top of their disenfranchised, is just really messed up. And they kind of realize it in a way that you kind of imagine that's how things would be when you played the original. And they do a good job with creating a place. And visually, I think it's just really stunning to see everyone, to see Cloud and Tifa and Barrett, and just like, yeah, this is what they look like. They look great.
Yeah, I mean, it's all really, really beautiful. And keep in mind, I'm playing on my jet plane of a console, my base PS4, my launch day PS4. I totally agree with you. I mean, the world feels super alive, just with like the different NPCs going about their days. Obviously, this is going to help with immersion in any game when they can actually build a world that feels like it's breathing. And this game definitely has that. Really, the only thing I wish they did was make some of the NPCs feel less Fallout-y, if that makes sense. There's something about the in-game animations, like just when you're walking around, or if you're talking to an NPC, it feels reminiscent of the Bethesda game.
There's some real Bethesda jank going on in this game.
Yeah.
For sure. When you walk into an area and like every NPC's VO lines trigger all at the same time, you're like, oh my god.
It's so overwhelming.
Yeah.
Honestly, this game is just so pretty. And again, the main cast is really beautifully well done. The backgrounds, the set pieces, everything's so big, and they've never looked better. But yeah, those other characters, some of the ancillary NPCs, they look rough, and it can really kind of take you out of a moment when, you know, you're having this conversation with this NPC who's giving you this, you know, little tiny side quest, and their, you know, mouth kind of just gets all like gummy, and it just kind of like rum rum rums. It's just like weird movement. It's like, you look at Cloud, and Cloud is absolutely beautiful, and then it switches to this other person. It's like, oh, are you from Fallout 76? And it's like, ooh. But overall, the game is like really beautiful just to look at, and he's like, if you just sit there and you kind of like pan the camera around, so nice. And again, this is just a quick aside here. We did get free codes from Square Enix, so again, thank you Square Enix for providing us the codes and allowing us to be able to review this game. So let's talk about something that is a Final Fantasy, or really a Square Enix staple. Let's talk about the music, and let's talk about the sound effects. What do you think? Let's start with Amir. What do you think of the soundtrack? Because I want to get this unbiased opinion first.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's great. There's definitely a lot of, I mean, just with the sound in general, just like the ambiance, it all flows very well. It definitely makes it nice to just walk around through the world and just kind of be in that moment. Just the different, you know, sound pieces that's kind of hitting it at the same time. You know, I mentioned earlier that the world does feel alive with the NPCs, and this also does lend itself to the soundtrack, to the sound effects, just everything that's happening. It all feels real, and it's nice to be in it. And obviously the music is awesome, and I like how you can find different parts of the OST and play them at the jukebox. I don't know, I think that's really cool.
I think that the sound work is just masterfully done. A lot of the sound effects seem the same but updated in a really good way. The music, the tracks are just like incomprehensibly good in terms of what they were able to do with the source material. And maybe some people might not like that because they have changed quite a bit. And then, but it's really fun to see like foreshadowing, or you hear you'll see a jukebox and it's playing like the Golden Saucer theme or something. And that stuff just sounds so good. It's on parallel or better than what they do with like the Super Smash Brothers soundtrack, in terms of just like making it feel like just super polished and brand new. These sounds and sights, I guess, that combined together just make it the best it possibly could be. I don't know if I'm gushing too much. I like, critically, I will say that there's some parts in the game where I'm like, oh, that didn't hit right, or they're playing like a familiar theme, but you're just walking around the slums and you're like, this seems off for this part where I'm just like grinding the side quest, and this music score is like way too epic for this. I don't know if you experienced the same thing,
I did experience that once. There was a moment, I don't remember what I was doing, but I know that I had noticed that a certain sound track was going on for a little too long. Even like it was like the down moments, and it was still like the music was still really high, and then like the high moments, and it was the same. Yeah, I mean the music is great, but sometimes they time it out weird, and I don't know if that's just a bug, but I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, it's a weird musical cues. Absolutely weird musical cues for sure. But aside from that, the songs are really lovingly remixed and recreated. I really do agree that it's like this is a very Super Smash Brothers type treatment for remastering all of these songs, and all of those sound effects get the same kind of treatment. It's just like, oh, there it is every single time. And I want to shout out Barrett singing the Final Fantasy Victory theme on occasion, which is super absolutely adorable, and I loved that. Barrett was super great this entire game. Barrett was probably of the main, like, you know, the big characters in this game. Barrett was so perfect. I feel like Barrett above anybody else was so good. Okay, so we've been gushing, we've been talking about a lot of good stuff. Let's get to those technical issues and gripes. I hated the camera. I hated it. It's so annoying. This camera might be, I feel like Square just doesn't understand the camera, the whole thing in most of their games. It works sometimes in like some of their games, but for whatever reason, Final Fantasy VII Remake, this camera just, it gets into awkward positions. It gets too close. It has a habit on focusing on the worst possible angle in the middle of a boss battle and completely throws off my rhythm. It's awful. It's a terrible camera, and I don't like it.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of times when I'll be walking up to a set piece or something, and Tifa will be like, wow, look at over there, and the camera pins, and I'm like, wait, am I looking at the right thing? Because I just don't see it, right? Like, I don't understand what I'm supposed to be looking at. There's a section where you're kind of over the slums and you see, different parts, and it's like a mazy section where the party is trying to find their way, and they're like, look at that thing over there, and I'm just like, I didn't see anything. Anytime they cued me to look at the thing, I definitely was not paying. I was like glued to my minimap just because of the way like the level design is and stuff, and I think that stuff could be stronger. The camera is definitely one of the biggest weaknesses, and I think the camera combined with some of the like obtuse traversal mechanics where it's like, oh, Cloud has to climb this ladder or like do the monkey bars over some like gap of this thing, that, and the animation just takes forever, and it looks cool, I guess, but it's just like you're trying to get from one place to the other, and this guy can do like 100 flips in combat, but when he needs to like pull the switch, you gotta like hold that triangle button forever, and then he slowly kind of does it.
Really weird padding, isn't it? It's just like, this game is already long. You don't need to make me do something that's really just kind of, it feels like it's like a last minute addition to this. It's like, oh, we got to make this one section, we got to pad this a little bit. Just make them hold down the triangle button for like 60 seconds.
Squeeze through this crack, and it's like a 30-second segment, and maybe it's for loading or whatever, but then you're like, oh crud, I don't need to go this way. This way's a dead end, and then you like stop in the middle and try and go back, and the camera gets all weird, and you're slowly moving through. It's the worst.
So, I mean, as far as the camera goes, I mean, I don't know if it's because I've gotten so used to the kind of janky camera in, like, say, Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm kind of used to that, and I know kind of, like, how to work around it. There were a few times where I was, like, my camera would kind of bump into something, and I would be a little bit out of view. But, I mean, aside from that, it wasn't too bad for me. I have a few small, aside from the, your camera thing, I have a few small ones as well, like weird walking animations that were more immersion breaking than anything. And there was also this part where I battled two of the sweepers, are they called? The two big mech dudes. So when I had actually finished the battle, a cutscene played and showed Wedge delivering some dialogue to Cloud, and he was actually clipping into the sweeper while the sweeper was exploding, and this was during a cutscene. But yeah, stuff like that, obviously it's extremely immersion breaking, and it just doesn't feel tight. I mean, the game has a ton of potential, and hopefully these are things that can obviously be fixed with an update. And again, these are just totally small things, like not being able to access an area because there's a stool in the way, but clearly enough space to get through. So you just have Cloud doing his sprinting animation, trying to get past it. And this is an area you could totally access. It's just Cloud doesn't have that animation for scooting by something.
Yeah, I think more than technical issues, one of my larger issues with the game is pacing, especially having played the original. You kind of move through that early Midgar section at a pretty rapid pace. You go from, reactors to Sector 7 slums, Tifa's bar and stuff. You're in and out of that stuff really, really quickly. And this game really stretches that stuff out, which can be kind of a bummer, especially if you know what's coming, but maybe even for new players too. But, again, I just say probably stick with it. It's going to pay off in the long run. But yeah, like there's sections of the world that are before were kind of just like a walkway, but now it's like a whole section with multiple enemy encounters and stuff like that. But ultimately, if you can get past the pacing, I think Final Fantasy VII Remake has a lot to offer, narrative-wise, and even combat and just being in that world.
So let's wrap this up. Final thoughts. Let's start with Evan.
Oh boy, okay. My final thoughts, this is probably one of my favorite games of the year, and not because I think like it's a particularly great game gameplay-wise. I think like what we talked about, kind of moving through the environments and stuff can feel a little obtuse, at least for me, and the combat for newcomers is just gonna be a little bit rough, I think. But this is just a really, really fascinating game. It's like Caden said, it's more than a remake, right? It's a reimagining of what Final Fantasy can be, especially with the story and especially with the mechanics and the way everything plays out. It's just such a great take. It's such a task that they had to kind of reimagine this game and make combat feel good and make the world just right and make these places that you've been before just seem as inspiring and just like the first time you see Aerith's house, for example, that stuff's just kind of amazing, right? And it really stands out and it's kind of a testament to the original design, but it's also a testament to what this team was able to do while making this game. Ultimately, I think it feels like it's going to be a completely different thing than the original Final Fantasy VII. I think they're going to try and tell a different story here at some point, while kind of also staying true to the original, which is really, really cool. It's really cool for us who get to kind of enjoy the nostalgia stuff, but also, get to experience something new. And then on the other hand, if you've never played a Final Fantasy game or Final Fantasy VII, if you've never played Final Fantasy VII before, I think it's going to be really, really cool for you to kind of experience all this with like a modern lens. And then I'd also just like to say, if you are new to this, stick with it, because I know like I kind of mentioned earlier, some of the stuff seems really, really shallow at the front, but this story definitely goes places. It's got a lot to tell. There's way cooler characters coming. There's really cool arcs coming. And I think, Caden, you even alluded to like where this first kind of chapter ends with Final Fantasy VII Remake. By the time you get to the end of this game, I think it's going to be something quite a bit different, right?
I believe so, but let's get that opinion from that person who hasn't actually played Final Fantasy VII before. Amir, final thoughts.
Final thoughts. Well, we're in a state of remakes, right? We are in the age of remakes right now.
Back to back, in fact, 2 big ones back to back.
Yeah, real big ones. Yeah, and I think we're getting some pretty great stuff. I mean, whatever issues I do have with this game aren't huge compared to the actual fun I'm having with it. I mean, sure, it's slow at times, that the pacing can be a little bit weird. I feel like when the game is at its weakest, that's when it's having you do some sort of side quest or something. Because that's where I mainly got lost or confused in. And it could just be an issue of me not fully understanding like the waypoints and just like small things like that. It could totally be my fault. But I mean, when the actual action is picking up and you're learning new ways to tackle a battle, that's where the game really shines, in my opinion. I mean, all the characters have motive, and that's really sold here through some good voice acting, but can also pull you out of the immersion with some bad voice acting. Again, these are all just very small gripes, but it all depends on the cutscene you're getting, and that's unfortunate that it's not entirely consistent throughout. But I mean, I'm having fun with it. I don't know. I think it's everything I like about Final Fantasy from the Final Fantasy games I've played, in the style that I always wanted them to play in, if that makes sense. But I'm going to keep playing it because I'm eager to see what happens next.
Well, you know what? I think this game is an incredibly solid setup for what will probably end up being people's definitive way to play and experience Final Fantasy VII going forward. As we make our way through into the future, it will be harder and harder to play those classic games, but you still can play the original Final Fantasy on pretty much every console now. So, hey, you can go play the original Final Fantasy VII if you want, but this, I feel like, this is going to take things a step further. But again, this is only one very small section of Final Fantasy VII as a whole, and I do feel that calling it Final Fantasy VII Remake is more than a bit misleading, because it really is not a remake of this game. And having that title just kind of sets you up for something, and ultimately it only delivers a little bit of that. There is a lot of reimagining in this quote-unquote remake, and not a lot of remake in this remake. So this whole reimagining thing of, what is essentially the Final Fantasy VII Midgar arc, and that's what this game really is, it's not a bad thing. But don't expect to get any further than that in the plot, and it will kind of leave you waiting and wanting more, especially if you know what's around the corner. And we don't know when a Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2 will be released. It will probably come, but it's just when, and it's gonna leave us hanging for a very long time. And the conclusion of this game is also very satisfying, but it does leave you wanting a bit more, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. For newcomers, it definitely feels like sequel bait, to be honest. And for old timers, you're kind of going to be a little shocked at what this is potentially pointing towards. And I said this earlier, I feel that this is more alternate universe Final Fantasy VII than actual remake of Final Fantasy VII. And that's great, because it'll leave us guessing, those people who have been playing Final Fantasy VII over and over and over again, it'll keep us guessing at what actually is going to happen next. And that's really cool. So I'm excited and ready for more, especially with how different things play out. But when that actually happens is up to Square Enix, and they sure love to take their time with things. And considering the fact that we saw this as a tech demo on the PS3 way back before the PS3 even launched, it may be some time, but hopefully it won't be that long.
Yeah, wasn't it back in like 2005 or something?
It was a long time ago.
Yeah, jeez. If it wasn't 2005, it feels like it.
But, thanks Square Enix for providing us codes. We very much appreciate it. What are your thoughts on the Final Fantasy VII Remake? Leave them in the comments. I know there's going to be some hot debates in there about what you liked, what you didn't like. We really want to see them, so leave them in the comments. We really appreciate it, and thank you for watching Inside Gaming.
The demo for the much anticipated Final Fantasy VII Remake is out right now. What are you doing watching this video? Go play it.
Just kidding, no, please stop leaving. We need your views. Bear with us for the next 10 minutes or so and then go play it. But it's definitely something you're gonna wanna check out because it's pretty good.
Bear with us for exactly 10 minutes and 1 second. Whip out the old coronavirus excuse.